Awesome. Thank you, Jesse. Um, so, during today's report, not only will you be able to hear from folks in Catalyst, California, but more importantly, you'll be able to hear from our partners in Faith in the Valley and the Children's Partnership. And you'll get to know a bit more about the work they're doing to advance racial justice. Once we're done with the overview of the report, my colleague Layla will do a brief walkthrough of the website, the Race Counts website, and we'll close out with time for Q&A. As we go through the presentation, please put any questions that you have in the chat, and we'll be sure to get through them. We'll get through them during the Q&A section. Before I continue, let me start with introductions. So the speakers for today's webinar include myself, Matt Trujillo, Associate Director of Strategic Initiatives at Catalyst California, and my colleague Layla Farouzan, Senior Manager of Research and Data Analysis at Catalyst. We also have my colleague Jesse Salcedo here, who will be helping out with tech and managing the chat for us. But like I said, more importantly, we also have two of our partners who are going to be speaking on today's webinar. They're Alexandra Alvarado, who's a community organizer with Faith in the Valley, and Eva Rivera, Policy Director with the Children's Partnership. So let me tell you a bit about Race Counts and set the context here. Race Counts was developed by Catalyst California and a number of our community-based organization partners who are on the front lines of the fight for racial justice, including our steering committee members, PICO California, California Calls, and the USC Equity Research Institute. In the racial justice field, Catalyst and our partners realized that there were few tools that offered community advocates a clear picture of the biggest obstacles to equity at the state, county, and local levels. And the Race Counts tool aims to address this gap by blending advocacy, organizing, and research to provide data that can be used to frame racial justice campaigns. Launched in 2017, the Race Counts tool provides valuable data and analysis to community-based organizations, policymakers, philanthropy, and other advocates looking to address racial disparities in their communities. Race Counts has racial disparity data across 7 major issue areas: crime and justice, democracy, economic opportunity, education, healthcare access, healthy built environment, and housing. Within each one of these issue areas, Race Counts as data for multiple indicators, for a total of over 40 indicators overall. In addition to hosting racial disparity data, the Race Counts website also provides stories of organizations that have partnered with Race Counts to advance racial justice, as well as hosting key research reports, which brings us to the 2023 annual report. The 2023 annual report provides an in-depth look at the state of racial disparity in California using the most recent Race Counts data. In addition to highlighting key findings from the Race Counts data, the report also provides policy recommendations on how to address the disparities that are uplifted in the report, and stories from organizations and coalitions doing work on the ground to eliminate these disparities. The 2023 annual report is being released more than 3 years since the first COVID-19 case came to California, and protesters took to the streets to demand justice for George Floyd. During the peak of the pandemic and the racial justice reckoning, California saw advocates and organizers working with our communities of color rise to the challenge, organizing mutual aid networks and pushing our leaders to take bold action. In turn, we saw policymakers adopt critical reforms and protections, from emergency food aid programs and eviction moratoria to efforts to reallocate funding from suppression-based policing in favor of positive investments. In the face of twin emergencies, we showed just what we're capable of. As we enter the post-pandemic era, the question of whether we can continue to make progress on racial disparities is more urgent than ever. We believe the data in this report can help advocates advance racial equity, support our most vulnerable residents, and chart a path into an uncertain future. We conducted 3 types of analysis in the report: a county rankings analysis, where we examined the highest and lowest ranked counties across the state for both racial disparity and overall outcomes; a regional analysis, where we dove deep into disparity in outcomes for counties across the state's 6 regions; and a deep dive into 5 indicators that we'll go through later in the webinar. I'm going to go through each analysis in turn. So starting with our county rankings analysis, the race counts data shows that many smaller counties tend to have below average outcomes and higher than average disparity. Mono and Trinity counties, two of the 5 smallest counties in the state, have the highest disparity and worst outcomes in California, respectively. Turning to moderate-sized counties, Marin and San Francisco have some of the best overall outcomes, but also among the highest disparities in the state. The data also show that Fresno and Tulare counties are 2 of the 5 counties with the worst outcomes in California. LA, the state's largest county, has below average outcomes, but also below average racial disparities. Some counties may be cause for more optimism. San Luis Obispo stands out as a particularly better outcome, lower disparity county. 2 Southern California region counties, San Diego and Orange, are among the 5 lowest disparity counties in the state. 2 Sacramento area counties, Placer and El Dorado, are among California's 5 highest outcome counties. While no county is better than all the others across the board, and even those with low disparity rankings are only relatively less disparate, there still may be lessons in equity to be learned by examining the areas where these counties have been successful. So now we're going to turn to our regional analysis. On the slides with the regional analysis, you'll see maps of the region where the counties are different colors. To help you understand the maps, let me walk you through what the colors mean. Counties that are red have higher than average racial disparity and worse than average outcomes. Counties that are orange have higher than average racial disparity and better than average outcomes. Counties that are yellow have lower than average racial disparity, but are also worse than average outcomes. Counties that are purple have lower than average disparity and better than average outcomes. So what we're looking at here are counties in the Northern Sierra region. This region consists primarily of low-density rural counties, and over half of the Northern Sierra region counties have worse than average outcomes and higher than average disparities. Turning to the Bay Area, we see that it is a higher outcome region, with Solano being the only member of the region with below average overall outcomes. Most counties in the region are close to the average on overall racial disparity, though the region does include 2 of the highest disparity counties in the state, San Francisco and Marin. When we look at the San Joaquin Valley, we see that all counties in the region have lower than average overall outcomes. This is the only region in the state where that's the case. When it comes to racial disparities, however, we see a clear geographic distinction where counties in the southern half of the valley have higher than average disparities, while those in the northern half have lower than average disparities. Turning to the Southern California region, we see that all counties in this region have lower than average racial disparity. This is unique among California's regions. Unfortunately, 4 of the 6 counties, all except Orange and San Diego, also have worse than average outcomes. Interestingly, this creates an almost coastal inland split within the region, although LA County breaks the pattern with lower outcomes that are comparable to those in the Inland Empire counties. The Central Coast region is a relatively better outcome, lower disparity county or region, with only 1 higher disparity county, Santa Cruz, and likewise only 1 worse outcome county, Monterey. While the southern counties in the region are all better outcome and low disparity, we see greater variation in the northern region. The Sacramento area region is a high-performing region with 3 of its 4 counties having better than average overall outcomes. The exception here is Sacramento County, which is the largest county in the region. This makes it similar to other large counties in the state that also have worse than average outcomes. The region also has relatively low racial disparity, with only 1 county, Yolo, falling within the 20 most racially disparate counties in the state. So that was our regional analysis, and I want to turn to our indicator analysis. In the development of the report, we engaged our community partners and asked them what issues and indicators their communities were most impacted by. And we asked them what issues and indicators they would want us to uplift in the report. They shared that they want us to uplift living wage, housing cost burden for renters, and high school graduation and suspensions, as well as incarceration. So now I'll review our findings for each one of these indicators. So starting with living wage, if you look at the state level, what we see is that employers are least likely to pay Latinx, American Indian, Alaska Native, Black workers a living wage. When you look regionally, we see that all counties in the San Joaquin Valley region have lower than average percentages of workers paid a living wage. Of the 8 counties in the region, 5 of them also have high levels of racial disparity. On the flip side, all counties in the Bay Area region have high percentages of residents making a living wage. Of the 9 counties in that region, 8 also have lower disparity. Policy recommendations to reduce disparities in living wage include raising and enforcing the minimum wage and promoting pathways to high wage jobs, providing people with a guaranteed basic income, and expanding the safety net programs and services for low income California. Turning now to housing cost burden for renters, at the state level, we see that Black and Latinx renters are more likely to be housing cost burden than the average California renter. And to be clear, when we say housing cost burden, what we mean is that these are renters who spend 30% or more of their income on housing costs. Regionally, we see that all counties in the Southern California region have a higher than average share of renters for a cost burden. And all but one of the counties in the region are relatively low disparity. So the exception is Imperial County, which is the highest disparity county in the state for this indicator. The overall low outcomes means that even low disparity counties have a lot of Californians of color that are struggling. For example, in LA County, about 6 in every 10 Black or Latinx renters are cost burden. Perhaps surprisingly, the picture is not that different in the San Joaquin Valley region. 6 of the 8 counties in the region have lower outcomes on this indicator with higher than average share of cost burden renters. To reduce disparities in this indicator, we propose a few policy recommendations, including increasing affordable housing production and preservation, which would also require the creation of a permanent funding source for affordable housing production and preservation, and expanding protections for low-income tenants. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to hand things over to Alexandra Alvarado with Faith in the Valley, who's going to share more about their housing justice. Alexandra, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Catalyst California, for this opportunity, and most importantly, for the strong and important work that you all do and share. Faith in the Valley is a multi-faith, multiracial, multi-generational, grassroots nonprofit organization. We operate and build power in 5 counties across the Central Valley. So that's in Kern, Fresno, Merced, Stanislaus, and San Joaquin. Our organization is led by volunteer leaders impacted by equity issues, people of color, low-wage workers, young people, immigrants, students, and the formerly incarcerated, and other vulnerable community members. Our mission focuses on leadership formation of volunteer leaders in community organizing and civic engagement to amplify the voices of historically impacted and excluded Central Valley residents, equipping them to tell their stories, to build power, and to act together for systems and policy change that's rooted in advancing racial equity. Our current campaigns are focused on immigration, gun violence reduction, public safety, healthy neighborhoods and parks, and land and housing justice. We believe through research, data, community, lived expertise, and coalition building that we can create a different and better world for everyone and their families across the Central Valley. In each of our counties, there are safe spaces that are growing and building people power to create systemic and sustainable changes that truly give value and worth to every person living there. Faith in the Valley's People's Housing, our platform, is a living document that lays out our North Star vision for land and housing justice across the Central Valley. We believe that every person, regardless of background, income, identity, or conformity to social or legal norms, should have safe, accessible, sustainable, and deeply permanently affordable housing in a thriving, healthy, equitable community that works for all people, our planet, and all living beings. We are committed to fighting in unity with renters, bank tenants, and allies of all backgrounds, identities, experience, and abilities for the Central Valley as it should be. Our Faith in the Valley Regional Housing Team, it formed in the response to the longstanding housing crisis that's been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. The San Joaquin Valley has experienced decades of disinvestment in all areas of policy, particularly housing. The pandemic exposed the myth that the Central Valley, often portrayed as affordable, were immune to California's housing affordability crisis. But recent reports, like the one Matt was just showing, found that low-income families across the valley are paying over half of their income on rent. And the Central Valley cities that had some of the highest rent increases in the nation since the start of the pandemic. And on top of the growing unaffordability, many residents are often paying for dilapidated and unsafe units that fail to meet basic habitability standards. Across the valley, we've worked on state policy. We've created a path to study an expansion of social housing with the state passage of SB 555. This makes California the first state in the US to enact social housing legislation. We worked on the passing of SB 567, which closes loopholes in eviction law and provides clear mechanisms for accountability and enforcement against violations of the Tenant Protection Act. And at all levels in the counties, we are working with local electeds on eviction protection programs, building tenant associations and unions, working towards community stewardship and ownership with CLTs, and advocating for the decriminalization of homelessness, and so much more. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Thank you again, Catalyst, for this time.
Thank you, Alexandra, for all the work that you all have been doing to fight for housing justice in the Valley. Let me turn my camera back on and go back to sharing my screen here. So now what I'm going to do is talk about the findings from the two indicators from our education issue area, starting with high school graduation. So when you look at the state level, we see that our school systems are less likely to graduate Black, American Indian, Alaska Native, Latinx, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander students than the average California student. When you look regionally, we see that most of the Bay Area and Central Coast counties have above average graduation rates, as well as relatively low disparities. When you look at the San Joaquin Valley, there's a notable north-south divide with better rates in the north and lower rates in the south. Fresno and Kings County have especially high disparities, the fourth and the sixth highest, respectively, in the state. So not only is our school system not graduating, failing our students by way of graduation, when you look at suspensions, you see a similar pattern. At the state level, we see that public schools are more likely to suspend Black, American Indian, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, and Latinx students more than the average student. Looking regionally, we see that while many of the more populous counties like LA, Santa Clara, and Orange have among the lowest overall suspension rates statewide, disparities do remain. Most Bay Area counties have lower than average suspension rates overall, but most also have higher than average racial disparity. San Francisco County, where schools suspend Black students at a rate nearly 4 times the average, stands out as the most disparate county in the state for this indicator. Taken together, the policy recommendations that we propose to address these inequities for both graduation and suspension include increasing the number of racially just, relationship-centered community schools in high-need communities, providing high-need schools and high-need students with increased targeted resources, and promoting access to and investment in early care and education. So now I'm going to turn things over to Eva Rivera with the Children's Partnership to share more about their work fighting for racial justice in the education space and in particular within the early care and education. Let me stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Emma.
Thank you, Matt. While I pull up my slides, let me just make sure that you can all see that. I just want to take a moment to introduce myself and a little bit about the Children's Partnership. I'm Eva Rivera, as Matt mentioned, and thank you for the opportunity to share about our work. The Children's Partnership is a statewide child health advocacy organization focusing on policy, research, and community engagement to ensure that all children have access to the supports they need to grow up healthy and thrive. Today, I have the honor of speaking about the work that the Children's Partnership, along with the organizations that you see on your screen, are doing on behalf of the Whole Child Equity Partnership, which is a multiracial, multi-sector coalition representing early care and education, housing, health and wellness, mental health, K through 12 education, social justice, and the First Five infrastructure. A whole child equity approach prioritizes support for families facing the greatest challenges and provides integrated and coordinated services from early childhood education through K through 12 across various sectors. And those include health, healthcare, social services, and obviously education. A whole child approach also focuses on supports from trusted, aligned, and trained professionals who lift up the strengths and assets of children and families, strengthen cultural and linguistic competence, and address the trauma that our systems inflict on young children and their families. So as a whole child equity partnership, our vision and our approach is that through this multidisciplinary, multi-sector collaboration, our goal is to make California the best state to have, raise, and be a child, which is, of course, I know what we all want who are in this room. And in order to do that, we recognize that we need to work together and directly with families to ensure that their voices are heard and their needs are represented in policies and implementation of such policies. We recognize the importance of creating a feedback loop that informs the process at every decision-making level, ultimately experiencing a narrative and systems change that centers community. So as a whole child equity partnership, we are focusing on the 5 goals that you see on your screen today. And so we cover a large range of areas that we envision are essential for us to make California the best place for little kids and their families. And you'll note that some of the work crosses over. We are a group that believes and lives in the space of intersectional advocacy. And so as we think about the data we just heard around graduation rates and who is succeeding in our educational systems, I want to specifically highlight the work that the WCEP is doing as it relates to early learning and development opportunities. We want to ensure that families have the social supports that they want to enable the early learning and development of babies and toddlers. And this work looks like as follows. We're focusing on childcare rate reform. Our goal is to ensure that that work gets implemented and is informed by not just the providers, but also the families. We're also thinking and we're focusing on the implementation of a whole child equity tool, which is a bill and an effort that was led by Catalyst California and TCP supported. And we're also working on strengthening attention to dual language learners. So to go a little more in depth, supporting the implementation of the statewide whole child equity tool will provide a targeted universalism approach to equitably allocate whole child resources for children in communities most impacted by multiple compounding barriers rooted in historic underinvestments. Our work will also focus on ensuring infant and toddler care providers across the mixed delivery system receive the full resources that they need to provide quality care that reflects family needs. We recognize that a lot of these providers are coming from underinvested and underrepresented communities. And so, as I mentioned, our work is intersectional and it overlaps. And we also want to ensure that childcare providers have the data and the resources needed to support young dual language learner children by establishing an asset-based dual language learner identification process in the mixed delivery system. And this includes cradle to career programs that are, in the coming up. We also want to expand access to infant and early childhood mental health consultation in subsidized childcare settings. So again, supporting a whole child approach to ensure that children are succeeding from the very beginning so that when they get to the K through 12 system, they have all of the resources needed to be successful. Current research suggests that children from low-income families benefit from having access to high-quality healthcare, including behavioral health services. And we know that with these supports, families and children experience increased success and long-term positive outcomes. I don't think I need to say that to this group. I know you all believe that as well. And so our goal is to ensure that the policies and the mixed delivery system is truly, truly benefiting the families and children that it is intended to serve. And I just want to wrap up by stating just a quote from Audre Lorde that we know really drives our work at the WCP, which is that there is no thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. Our focus at the WCP recognizes that children don't come into our spaces alone. They come together with their families, and when their families are thriving, then children are thriving. And so our goal is to ensure that the implementation of policies intended to serve those families are truly reflecting the needs and meeting the needs that the families have uplifted as important to them. So I will stop there, and I know that we will have time for questions, so I'll turn it over to Matt. Thank you for having me.
You, Evan, and thank you for all the work that you all are doing, fighting for California. So to get towards closing out this section, let me get back to sharing my screen and moving us to our last indicator that we uplift in the report, which is incarceration. And when you look at the incarceration data statewide, we see that counties are more likely to incarcerate Black, American Indian, Alaska Native, and Latinx Californians than the average resident. Regionally, Bay Area counties, or in Bay Area counties, racial disparity levels for incarceration are mixed. Contra Costa County stands out with the second lowest incarceration rate in the state, while also having the fifth worst racial disparities. Similarly, LA has the 10th lowest incarceration rate, but the third worst disparities in the state. When you look at the San Joaquin Valley, the counties in that state, all but one, have lower than average racial disparities in incarceration. The policy recommendations that we uplift to reduce and eliminate disparities in incarceration include decreasing the law or the role of law enforcement, advancing decriminalization policies, and reinvesting resources spent on the criminal legal system into care-based services, education, youth development, jobs, and living wages. So the findings in this report spotlight just some of the ways that California systems create disparate outcomes for our communities. Within this broad picture, race counts helps to uplift significant variations by race and by region that must be accounted for in crafting solutions. And we've identified specific actionable policy ideas. Yet little of this is news to residents, parents, and students who make up these communities. Working alongside homegrown organizers like Alex and Eva, and advocates like Alex and Eva, they are ready to demand solutions that will make a difference in their communities. The aim of race counts is to provide shared data and a shared framework that can build solidarity, cohesion, and information between racial justice advocates working across California. These connections have never been more important as our state decides what the new normal in this post-pandemic world will be. Will it be business as usual in the status quo, or will it be true transformation? So now we can answer a few questions before I have my colleague go through a bit more about the website and how you can use it in your work. I did see that there were a few questions that came through the chat, so we can start with those. While we're speaking, again, if you have any questions, go ahead and put questions in the chat, whether it be for me or Eva and Alexandra as well. I know one thing that came up in the chat was whether or not the report only looks at county level data. So the report looks at statewide data and county level data. We are looking to add city level data soon. So while we don't have that ability right now, we are looking to add city level data before the end of the year, right? And that will help us get at looking at more micro, because we know looking at counties, some of the counties are huge. It might limit our ability to look at variation within a county. So stay tuned for city level data. We'll make sure we reach out to our channels to let you all know when that city level data is up. Let's see here. We did get a question about our data sources, and I'm wondering, Layla, if you could just share a bit more broadly about where a lot of the data that we.
Sure. So I did share in the chat a link for the indicator methodology. So that includes the source as well as, you know, the ways that we analyze that data to get to what you see on the website and in the report. A lot of the sources, indicators come from sources like the American Community Survey, so that's part of the census, or California Department of Education, as well as California Department of Justice and other organizations like that. And like I said, there's much more detail on that document. And then I would also just want to add, there was a question around, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong, the person who asked the question, but was a little bit around maybe intersectionality of social disadvantage as well as race ethnicity in terms of third grade reading scores, and potentially also, you know, the site currently disaggregates data, or we currently disaggregate data as much as possible into individual racial and ethnic groups. And maybe there was a question around having estimates for BIPOC students. And so just to say, we definitely agree that there are a lot of intersections that can be useful to look at. At this time, the core race counts really just focuses on disaggregating by race ethnicity. But we do some one-off blogs and other sort of analysis that does include some of those intersections, whether it's social disadvantage, immigration status, things like that, or gender, and more. And then, yeah, so and just overall, the race counts focus is really on trying to disaggregate as much as possible so we can see variation between the groups and what, you know, inequities are facing particular groups and who, you know, who are experiencing different levels of impacts. And so at this time, we don't have plans to create sort of aggregated estimates for BIPOC youth or people in general. Not to say it couldn't happen in the future, though.
Layla, I think we'll get to one more question before we turn it over to you, Layla, to go through a bit more detail about the website. One question that did come up was, how can we disseminate this information among those who are most affected? I would say a good way to do that is for you to share the reports among your members, the folks that you all are working with. That's one way to do it. We're happy to do presentations for your organization and your members, walk folks through specific data that is in your community. So we're happy to do more presentations, walk folks through the data as well. The people who have the best connection to those who are most impacted would be folks like you all and the organizations that you all work with and the coalitions that you all are a part of. So I believe we shared the link to the report in the chat, but please reach out to us if you'd like us to do a deep dive with your members, your community, the coalitions that you work with, and to talk about maybe data for your specific community. With that, I will hand things back over to Layla, who can go through a bit more the ways you can use the Race Counts website.
Thank you, Matt. As mentioned, I'm going to give you a quick overview of how you can use the data tools on racecounts.org. Next slide, please. So what you see here is the Race Counts homepage, and you can find the data pages that I'm going to cover in a little more detail under the Explore the Data and Issues options in that menu at the top. I also want to point out, although we won't cover it today, we do have some new and improved content around turning the data that you find on the site into action. You can find that under the Take Action section, as well as a news and stories section that includes blogs, case studies, and reports like the annual report as well. Okay, so the first page I'll cover is the issue page. So across all 7 Race Counts issue areas, we know that our public systems can determine the opportunities and challenges that residents face in almost every aspect of their lives. And so using one of the Race Counts issue pages will give you a lens to understand the outcomes that these systems are producing for different groups. And so on these pages, you'll get some background information along with some brief findings, reflecting some of the things you see in the report. There'll also be some key takeaways that are kind of more pointed around specific indicators. You'll get a brief background on systemic causes behind some of the inequities that we're seeing for each of the indicators in that issue, as well as policy levers to address the inequities that we see. And most of those pieces are available on all of the data pages across the site as well. And finally, the real meat of the page is the indicator bar charts. And so you can see an example here, and it shows the data broken out by race. And again, for some indicators that may be fewer or more groups that the data is available for. In this case, we have status offense arrests for youth. That's things like curfew violations and truancy. So you can get the information and the overall rate, right? So that's the outcome that Matt's been talking about, as well as the disaggregated rates by race, and that's where that disparity factor comes from, as well as some information about the data source and things like that. Next slide, please. The next page is the place page. And so, again, we know that place matters. The varying physical, social, and economic environments of our communities shape the experiences of those that live there, and that the drivers of those differences in our communities are built into the public systems and infrastructures that we have. So, exploring the data at the place level or for your particular community and comparing your community with others allows you to identify some key disparities and see who is most impacted in your community. So again, on this page, you'll find sort of an overview of your community, demographics, the population by race, a snapshot of the racial equity index map overall, and again, some key takeaways tailored to that particular community. And then you'll see all the bar charts for all of the indicators across Race Counts with the data broken out by race, which are very similar to the charts you'll see on the issue pages. And again, another key feature here is the ability to compare to another community. So you could compare, LA and San Diego counties, for example. And these types of pages can serve as a sort of data profile for your community. Next slide, please. The next option is what we call the race pages. And, on these pages, you can kind of explore the data through the lens of one particular racial or ethnic group. And it kind of highlights how well our systems are serving that particular group across all issues. So you can scroll through these charts and kind of quickly see where that one particular group is, on the spectrum of outcomes and how well the systems are serving them. And so we do have race pages for 6 groups. And if you'd like to know more about, why we have pages for those groups only or those particular groups, or how we work with race and ethnicity groups and definitions in our analysis, you can please visit our race and ethnicity methodology. I just want to pause because I think we lost the presentation slides before I go on. So I can put those back up. All right. Okay,
Layla, if you could just bear with us for,
Yep.
Sorry about that.
I think one of us dropped off, the one who was hosting the slides. Let's see here. I can possibly, maybe I will just try to share my slides. Let's see how it goes. Give me just a second here. Thank you for bearing with us. Okay. I'm going to share. Nice. Okay, hopefully folks are seeing the slides again. Give a thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so we'll try it this way. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have race pages for this particular set of racial and ethnic groups. And if you wanted to know more about that, you can visit that race and ethnicity methodology. And that covers how we kind of deal with this complicated, topic. And I just have shared an example here as well of what those types of charts look like, right? So you're going to see the selected group highlighted there in kind of pink, so it's kind of easy to focus in on how that one group is faring. Okay. All right, next we have the map page. And so, we know that, the patterns of settlement and economic development interact with the racial diversity of our state to create both opportunities and disparities. And viewing the data on a map will help you to recognize kind of regional trends and also see where there are some similarities maybe across regions that we wouldn't expect as well. So, looking at the map also allows you to see where data is missing or where data is not that reliable. So, for example, on this map that you see here representing the Healthcare Access Index, you can see that a lot of, or several counties in the Northern Sierra region appear gray on the map. That means that they either don't have data, or the data is not reliable, or the data is not complete enough. For example, it's maybe only overall data that's available, but the disaggregated by race data is not available. And so that just kind of hints at maybe areas for data advocacy, right? Kind of a step back from even the policy advocacy, right? Because we know there are disparities there and there are many different communities there, though the numbers may, the population numbers may be smaller. And again, on this page, you can view maps for any of the indexes or any of the indicators on the site. And you can also create maps sort of highlighting and zooming in on a specific county or set of counties, as well as a particular region of interest. Okay, almost there. So the next option is the disparity in outcome rankings. And so I think this is a very popular one because it's a really quick way to see how your community is doing compared to others. And, these ranks can make compelling talking points because they're very easily understood. Most folks, understand the concept of numbered rankings. Just want to point out, across the site, especially with the rankings, right? The rankings are relative. So a better rank doesn't mean that there's no more work to be done on disparity or outcomes, right? And that applies across indicators, when we say higher disparity, lower disparity, not, acceptable level of disparity, unacceptable level, right? So they're all relative rankings here, and there's still work to be done across the state. And on this, on the rankings page, again, you can pull up rank tables for all of the indexes or indicators on the site, and then you can sort those looking at outcomes or disparity ranks. You can also filter the tables and just get it for a particular county you're interested in, a group of counties, or a particular region as well. Okay, and the last option is the disparity in outcome scatter plot. And so this is, it allows you to see more. There's a lot more nuance on this than there may be on some of the other visuals in one sense. So you can see disparities, outcomes, and impact all in one place. And by impact, we are referencing the size of the population in a county, meaning how many folks are going to be impacted by either the poor outcomes or the disparity levels in that county. And, this chart can be helpful to identify outliers, right? The counties that appear at the edges of the chart, right? At the top or bottom, far left or far right. These are communities that may be, that are doing either much better or much worse than others, right? So for example, on this chart, which is chronic absenteeism, we can see San Francisco there on the very far right of the chart. So that's an outlier in terms of disparity on chronic absenteeism. It's much higher than average versus, the second and third ranked counties for disparity on this issue are Santa Clara, which is not labeled, but you can see Los Angeles there, that big orange bubble, right? So there's a big gap there between the first and third ranked counties versus, some of the others are much more clustered closely together. And that information, may be useful for certain applications. And lastly, I just want to point out before I close that all of these visuals are able to be downloaded in different formats. So they can be images, or some of them are PDFs and different things, or even, an Excel table for the rankings. So you can do that and then include in, your reports or PowerPoint or a social media post or anything like that. The exception being the maps, which are currently not downloadable, but we are hoping to change that in the near future. And with that, I will turn it back to Matt.
So I did drop off. We did experience some technical difficulties, but it looks like Layla and Jesse were able to keep things going. Thank you all. Race Counts is nothing but an amazing team behind the data and the website. So thank you all. So for these last few minutes, we'll open things back up to Q&A. So again, please put your questions in the chat. I'll turn to some that we were not able to get to previously. Eva, I think I might turn it over to you. There was a question that I think you responded to in the chat, but we could open it up to the full group here about English language learners. So if you could share a bit more about how you all define English language learners and the work that you all are doing. Next.
Yes, so this is actually a great point, and this is why these conversations are so important and having the back and forth. This is, I'm going to put Gilberto on the spot, or just around the conversation about what we mean by different things, right? So dual language learner, we've been traditionally speaking of it in terms of, English and another language. And I think this is helping me think about how are we defining that? What do we mean? And when we're entering into spaces that are having English language learner conversations or dual language learner conversations, making sure that we are uplifting all of the needs of our communities, which is again why these conversations are so important. That they are driven by the needs of families and how they are defining these terms. What do they mean by dual language learners? What are the languages that they are thinking about? So I really appreciate that conversation and that question in the chat. So thank you for that.
All right, I'm going through our chat here to see if there were other questions. There was a question about points of contact. I think, Layla, you have both my and your email address on the next slide, but you could reach out to either Layla or I if you'd like to have further conversations, or there might be questions that you all have that we're not able to get to today. If you go onto the Race Counts website, there's also, you have the ability to sign up to get announcements and updates, as well as to reach out to us to have more deep conversations about ways to partner together. So I encourage you all to either reach out to Layla or I, or to sign up for the Race Counts website. Let's see here. Are there any other questions that folks might have? I will say you can open it up in the chat, or you can take yourself off of mute and share your question. I'm seeing now in the chat, there was actually a question about what an educator, so teachers, counselors, or administrators could do to support our students of color. Eva, I'm not sure if you all have done any work in that space. Maybe you have some thoughts.
So we, I think that was a question that I answered in the chat briefly, but one of the most, in my experience working in school settings, is really making sure that we create a space and opportunities for families to be able to see themselves in the community of the school, to recognize their families, individuality, and cultures. And I say cultures because we know that families come with many cultures, whether that's beliefs, practices, country of origin, all of that comes into place. And so it's really important for us to uplift those, the unique assets that our families bring. The other thing that I think is really important, and I cannot say this enough, is making sure that families are seeing themselves reflected in the programs that we're offering, that they are meeting the needs that they have expressed are important to them. And so I think making sure that our communities have those spaces and have those relationships with educators is truly, truly important. It seems really simple, I know, but simple as a conversation and just finding out a little more about what is of value to the family can really get us really, really far.
Thanks, Eva. I see we have one question that came through the chat. Given the time, we'll use this as the last question. There's a question around a section about rural counties specifically. I'm assuming you're referencing the report itself. So there is not a section in the report that talks about rural counties specifically, nor a section on the website. We do a regional analysis, as we shared earlier. And so you're able to see, there are certain regions that have high numbers of rural counties like Northern Sierra region counties or the San Joaquin Valley. So you could look at certain counties within the regional lens that we take. And if there are specific counties that you are interested in looking at, you could, again, like Layla shared, look at data for the specific counties as well. But we don't necessarily do analysis. So that is something we could look into about looking at rural and urban counties and what there might be some distinctions there. If you're interested in talking through that a bit more, you could reach out to us. So we'll leave it at that. Again, thank you so much for taking time, for working and connecting with us. Again, please visit racecounts.org to learn more, and please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions that you have or any desire to continue to do work together. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your day. Jesse, I think you can stop.